Republicans and Democrats are guilty of spending over the last 50 to 100 years.
I'm shocked.
So you
shocked
can't
that you would suggest that's bipartisan.
You don't get run out of office in D.C. for spending money. You get run out for cutting programs. Listen, the concept of DOGE is super important. Fraud, waste, and abuse. But let's draw a dichotomy between, is he cutting fraud, waste, and abuse, or is he just cutting programs that he believes are not consistent with his politics that Democrats and Republicans voted upon? Now, give it a couple months, because you've got people who are being illegally fired. You got programs that are being illegally cut. There are 10 court decisions, federal court decisions, that are making their way through that have TRO, temporary restraining orders, which is equitable relief, that argues, or at least the courts have said, that you can't fire these people because they have merit protections, and you can't cut these programs. Why? Because the Congress is the only one that can start an agency and the only one that can shut an agency down, and the Article 3 courts are agreeing with that. Now, lastly, the top 10 states who get the most entitlements in this country are red states in the South. He's cutting into those red state entitlements that cannot function. Their very constituents they're working against, that's more pain for them. Give it 60 days, 90 days, right? And you're going to see those very constituents turn against the Republicans. So not only is it illegal, right, but they're hurting their own constituents, and these tariffs, a combination, are going to continue to have prices raised. Eggs are at an all-time high, and that combination can't spell success for a Republican administration that controls the House, Senate, and the White House. I don't know how they get away with it or how much longer they get away with it.
This is one thing, one small thing, but we have to constrict Chinese power and break loose from the stranglehold.
And go get those minerals and compete with China on the minerals. When I listen to you, are you saying that because China is harming the environment and affecting the environment and the warming of this planet, that just because they're doing it, we should do that too? That we have 500 years of coal, which empirical data says is harmful to our environment? We have international treaties that have said we want to reduce the emissions. Every country has an obligation to reduce the emissions, but because China's doing it, we ought to do our part to harm the environment too.
See,
There's empirical data and scientific evidence that coal burning is harmful to the environment and global warming. That's undeniable.
No,
so you want to go back to burning? You want to go back to burning coal?
I absolutely want to go back to burning coal.
Goodness gracious.
That is the basis of American energy.
My grandkids and your grandkids and great grandkids are going to suffer and pay
are going to have the same
environment.
Opportunities that you and I had to grow up.
A much warmer planet. A much warmer planet.
You're making assertions. You're making assertions.
I've read the empirical data to support it. You can't deny it.
I can deny it.
You can.
I absolutely can deny that.
I'll submit to you that scientific studies are now like polling data. The pollster goes to his client and says, the client says, what are the numbers? And the pollster says, well, what do you want them to be? All these studies that come out, you have to look at.
Scientists aren't pollers, though.
But
and there's a lot of data. There's a lot of empirical data out there to support that. So you disagree with the scientific data.
You say that because you were smart enough to go to law school. Those poor slobs that went.
I read the empirical data.
Poor slobs who went for PhDs are dependent on grants to get their money to fund their studies, and they're dependent on the people giving them the grants.
But that doesn't deny their independence.
And the grants are coming from leftist organizations.
So you don't believe in global warming?
Absolutely not.
You don't believe in global warming?
I believe the planet's constantly changing.
I was going to ask Scott, China could be the one single issue that brings Democrats and Republicans together. So there are many other angles when it comes to China. With that said, how do you think these tariffs will aim to address China's trade practices and military expansion?
The problem with China is that we are still interdependent on them because we have so much trade between these companies. And if they want to have a tariff war with China, they're only going to go so far. Now, the other challenge with China is that when you talk about military warfare, you're right. We can agree that China is expanding not only in the goal of the minerals and all of the minerals and
the rare earth
minerals, right? Thank you. At the same time, they're expanding in other countries, especially in Africa and South America, the Panama Canal or near the Panama Canal, and And we're just not trying to compete with them on it. You can give lip service to it, but they're everywhere. And now what they're doing is selling in exchange for infrastructure in a number of African countries. Now they're selling them weapons, if you will. And now you see with their global expansion, they make sure it's not just the South China Sea. And then, over the last 4 years, they've threatened us militarily, played with us in the South China Sea and other parts and stuff. And I don't believe we've had a really good response to that. I don't. I think militaristically, we need to stand up to them and push back. And so instead of arguing about global warming and coal fire, we ought to be talking about a military response, and more importantly, what we do to control their expansion around this world. And we need to be expanding around the world to compete with them, to give all of these countries an opportunity, not just to choose China, but to choose us and our democracy over China and their socialism.
I'll tell you what China
does. I sound like
does.
a Republican, forgive me.
Welcome to the tent, brother. We're with you all the way.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Come on over.
Ask another question, please.
Scott, I'm going to start with you.
I asked you not to start with me. This was a red meat speech to MAGA. And, what was interesting, everything he talked about, he's such a great marketer. We've heard all of that before. Panama, Greenland, what he's done on the executive order, Doge, all of these high points for the Republicans. We heard about it leading up to this speech, and then he touched on it, right? And so the whole marketing piece, the political rhetoric, that's a machine, and he's excellent at that. Now, the political reality is there were a lot of Democrats holding up false, 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 and I was making mental notes of that. But I think what made this speech slightly different and really better for the country were the human interest stories and the individuals, the young kid who was recovering from brain cancer, the young kid who couldn't get into West Point, the photo ops, as well as the rhetoric of the parents and the family members of those who were killed by, who were murdered, the firemen and Butler, and his legislative pieces to protect them. There was really a humanistic side to this thing that you don't usually get from Donald Trump, and he's figured that part out, because that's really what makes America great and makes all of us, whether we're Democrat or Republicans, we know those individuals. We have neighbors, we have friends who've been through challenges and life-changing pieces. And so those are my takeaways. Kind of interspersed the human interest stories too, in the second half of the speech, which was really good. And you don't see a lot of that from Donald Trump. And so maybe he's learned. I could take exception with a lot of the facts behind what his accomplishments were. You saw the Democrats hold up, false and so forth and so on. We'll have to leave that for the independent analysis. It was interesting that the Democrats' response did not take America through what they believe to be falsehoods, if you will. That'll run its course. The real thing to watch over the next 6 months, though, Donald Trump is making a big gamble on Doge and Ukraine and the agencies, getting rid of these agencies and saving money. He's got a big tax bill coming up, and it's a big gamble because it's got to work. If it doesn't work, the American people, even his own constituencies, will feel it. And if it does work, it's going to be a longer time before the Democrats get back into power. But if it doesn't work and Americans feel it, then the Democrats have got to narrate that pain, but have a solution for what the alternative is, because you can slash and burn, but it's got to work. And so far, with the markets down and with the courts intervening, I'd say he's got less than a 50-50 chance of getting it done, even though we all want fraud, waste, and abuse not to be in our government. I think he stayed in their seats on each of those issues. I don't think on all of those issues, but the Democrats have issues with some parts of all of those examples you gave. And for example, even we can agree that that the whole transgendered issue for children, we can agree on that. But it's Title IX, as I interpret that law, that needs to be changed. So instead of issuing an executive order saying that men are men or boys are boys and girls are girls, change how Title IX is implemented, narrow it, if you will, I think you get Democratic support on that. I just really do. But instead, he's got executive orders. And so it's not the Democrats don't want the president to succeed. They just don't like how he's going about it.